U.S. governors are closely monitoring the trade tensions with China. They know tariffs could affect their state's bottom line. I recently talked with Colorado's governor at the National Governors Association Summer Summit. John Hickenlooper was quick to point out the importance of trade between China and his state.
China is Colorado's third largest trading partner, right? Canada and Mexico are our closest trading partners, the largest in volume. But China is rapidly growing. And if you don't go there, if you don't really meet people firsthand and come demonstrate the commitment that you will meet them on their own turf, you have a much harder time attracting their business to come to your state.
As we look at the tensions between the two countries right now over trade, and yet on your level, the subnational level, we see so much engagement and these relationships built over time. Talk to me about the importance of that, and can that underpinning that's so important, that's been decades in the making, is it enough to help this kind of bumpy ride that we're going through?
Yeah, I think we have built, not just in Colorado, but across the country, we've built muscle, and that muscle has taken years to develop. But that muscle takes the form of a commitment to, a trading future. It doesn't mean that you don't want to adjust the system. And I think, NAFTA is a good example, hadn't been adjusted probably in 25 years. You need to balance things out and make sure that, every 5 or 10 years, maybe it's every 10 years, you look at the system and say, all right, are there winners, losers? How can we make it more fair for the losers? How can we figure out ways so that it should be, ideally, it should be a rising tide that raises all ships. And I think we were, just by our lack of putting the effort in, because it's hard. Every time you change the system, it's really hard. But that lack of putting the effort in did leave us with a lot of people that felt like they had been left behind, that they were the losers, and they raised their voices.
New avenues for trade, you talked about that. How important is it as a chief executive of state to always be thinking about that?
And one of the best ways to diversify your economy is look for export markets, and you start out looking at markets just outside your own state, right? That you're selling to other states, but still in this country. But at a certain point, you realize, my gosh, we're doing pretty well. These guys are exporting well. What would it take to be able to export into Canada or Mexico or South America? And then as you begin to develop that muscle, then you say, well, look at the size of these emerging markets like India and China. Just huge potential. And what can we do to make our state one of the players in that international trading community?
Next year, year after, talk to me about where you see the relationship with the United States and China. It's a bumpy road right now. Do you think things get ironed out soon, or is it going to take a while? And where would you like to see the trajectory going?
Well, I think the key, next year, let's say the next 2 years, it's clearly going to be a bumpy ride. And in many ways, I think we're using a sledgehammer when we should be using a small hammer like a thumbtack hammer. We don't have the right tool to really adjust these trading agreements properly. But I think the more interesting question is, where do we want to see our relationship with China in 20 years or 50 years? And what does that long-term relationship look like? How do we build a level of trust? One thing I think people too often don't recognize is, this world in the last 10 years has lifted 1 billion people out of poverty. A lot of those people were in China. And long term, that's a good thing for the world and a good thing for America.